the first thing I notice is the light. It's that particular shade of white that only exists in hospitals, sterile and unforgiving, designed to reveal everything you'd rather keep hidden. My throat feels like sandpaper, and there's a heaviness in my limbs that tells me I've been under anesthesia longer than I'd like. The taste of copper and antiseptic coats my tongue, and my mouth feels stuffed with cotton. The monitors beside my bed pulse with electronic heartbeats, their green lines rising and falling in perfect rhythm, while somewhere in the distance I can hear the soft squeak of rubber soles on linoleum and the muffled conversations of nurses changing shifts. The room smells of disinfectant and something else, something floral that seems out of place until I notice the small bouquet of daffodils on the windowsill. Evelyn's touch. She always brings flowers to sterile places, as if beauty could somehow soften the edges of clinical necessity. I turn my head slowly, expecting to see her in the visitor's chair with her reading glasses perched on her nose, maybe working through one of her crossword puzzles while she waits for me to surface from whatever chemical depths they've sent me to. Instead, I see him. Nathaniel Blake sits hunched forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles have gone white. His dark hair is streaked with silver now, and there are lines around his eyes that weren't there 20 years ago, but I would know that profile anywhere. His shoulders shake almost imperceptibly, like he's trying to hold something inside that's too big for his chest. The room tilts slightly, and for a moment I think it might be the medication. But no, this is something else entirely. This is the feeling of stepping off solid ground into empty air, of realizing that the careful architecture of your life has been built on a foundation that was never as stable as you believed. My chest tightens, not from the surgery, but from something much older and more complicated. We haven't spoken since the summer of 1987. 20 years of silence, of carefully constructed distance, of pretending that some things can simply be buried deep enough that they stop existing. 20 years of faculty meetings and dinner parties and anniversary dinners where I've perfected the art of being present while remaining carefully absent from my own life. But here he is, real and present and devastating in ways I had almost convinced myself I'd forgotten. I had convinced myself that if I never said his name aloud, if I never allowed myself to wonder where he was, or what he was doing, or whether he ever thought of me, then that summer would eventually fade into the same sepia-toned unreality as all my other college memories. I was wrong. My voice comes out as barely more than a whisper, rough from the breathing tube they must have removed while I slept. Why are you here? He doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifts his head and looks at me with eyes that carry the weight of decades. There's something in his expression that isn't quite relief, isn't quite sorrow. It's something heavier and more complex, like grief mixed with gratitude mixed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying secrets for too long. Without saying anything, he reaches for my hand. His fingers are warm against my cold ones, and the contact sends something electric through my entire body. Not desire, though that's there too, buried beneath layers of time and denial, but recognition. The kind of recognition that happens between people who once knew each other's breathing patterns, who once fell asleep to the sound of each other's heartbeats. His thumb moves across my knuckles, and I remember with startling clarity the way he used to trace patterns on my skin in the dark, like he was trying to memorize me through touch alone. 20 years collapse into nothing. I am 21 again, heart hammering against my ribs as we sat in his dormitory room with textbooks spread around us like shields, both of us pretending we were studying while the air between us grew thick with everything we couldn't say. I should pull away. I should ask him how he found out about the surgery, what he's doing in this town, why he chose now to materialize like a ghost made flesh. I should call for Evelyn, should restore the proper order of things, should retreat back into the safe boundaries of the life I've spent 2 decades constructing. Instead, I let his hand cover mine and feel something crack open inside my chest, something I've kept sealed for so long I'd forgotten it was there. The machines continue their steady beeping, marking time in a rhythm that feels urgent and patient all at once. Outside the window, I can see the parking lot where ordinary people are living their ordinary lives. getting into cars, and driving home to dinners and television and the comfortable predictability of their chosen existences, completely unaware that mine has just been turned inside out by the simple act of waking up to find the one person I never expected to see again sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand like he has the right to be there, like he never left at all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up in that hospital room, staring into the eyes of a man I thought I'd successfully erased from my life, you need to know about the 20 years that came before. You need to know about the careful, quiet existence I built for myself like a fortress against the possibility of exactly this moment. My life with Evelyn has always been painted in soft, muted colors. We live in a clapboard house on Elm Street that she insisted we paint a particular shade of blue. Not navy, not powder, but something in between that she found in a magazine and spent 3 weeks hunting down at hardware stores. I wanted white. We compromised, which is to say she won, and I learned to live with the blue. It's a good metaphor for our marriage, actually. She makes the decisions that matter to her, and I adapt. It's not resentment, exactly. It's more like a low-grade acceptance that this is how two people learn to share a life without stepping on each other's essential truths. Every morning for 18 years, I've woken to the smell of coffee brewing in our mismatched mugs. Hers is ceramic with a chip in the handle. Mine is glass and gets too hot to hold comfortably. She reads the local paper while I grade papers or prepare lectures, and we share the weather forecast and maybe a comment about the neighbor's new fence or the college's latest budget crisis. It's comfortable, predictable, safe. I teach American literature at Whitmore College, a small liberal arts school where the students are earnest and well-meaning, and tenure feels less like achievement than refuge. My office overlooks the quad, and in autumn, when the maple leaves turn gold, it's almost beautiful enough to distract from the growing sense that I'm watching life through glass instead of living it. My colleagues respect me. The dean considers me reliable. My student evaluations consistently praise my thoughtful approach to difficult texts. I've built a reputation as the professor who helps students understand that literature isn't just about what happens on the page, but about what it reveals about the human condition. The irony isn't lost on me. Weekends follow a pattern as reliable as sunrise. Saturday mornings, I work in our small garden while Evelyn runs errands in town. I've become skilled at coaxing tomatoes and herbs from New England soil, finding something meditative in the process of nurturing things into existence. She comes home with groceries and whatever novel caught her eye at the bookstore, and we settle into our respective corners of the porch, me with student essays or academic journals, her with her knitting and whatever story is currently absorbing her attention. Sunday dinners often include faculty couples or neighbors, conversations that flow around department politics, property taxes, and whose turn it is to organize the annual block party. I've learned to navigate these gatherings with practiced ease, contributing just enough to seem engaged while keeping the conversation safely in neutral territory. Evelyn is better at this than I am. She has a gift for drawing people out, for remembering details about their children and their ailments and their small triumphs. She makes people feel seen in ways I've never quite mastered. The photographs on our walls tell the story of a life well lived. Our wedding day 22 years ago, where we both look impossibly young and genuinely happy. Trips to Ireland and Italy during my sabbaticals. Christmas mornings with our daughter Miriam, who graduated from law school last year and calls every Sunday without fail. There are dinner parties and faculty events, camping trips and beach vacations, all the accumulated evidence of a couple who built something solid together. But if you knew what to look for, you might notice the space between us and those photographs. The way my smile never quite reaches my eyes. The way my hand rests on Evelyn's shoulder rather than pulling her close. The way I always seem to be looking just slightly past the camera, as if I'm searching for something that exists just outside the frame. This is a small town where everyone knows everyone, where your business becomes community property, whether you want it to or not. The social order runs on civility and carefully maintains silence about anything that might disturb the peace. People here have perfected the art of seeing only what they're supposed to see, of asking only the questions that have acceptable answers. It's the kind of place where you can live for decades without anyone really knowing you, as long as you follow the unspoken rules about what parts of yourself are safe to reveal. I've become a master of this particular art form. I know how to be present at faculty meetings while thinking about something else entirely. I know how to laugh at the right moments during dinner conversations, how to ask follow-up questions that demonstrate interest without revealing too much of my own thoughts. I know how to be a good husband, a reliable colleague, a respected member of the community, all while keeping the most essential parts of myself locked away so deep that sometimes I forget they exist at all. Until the morning I opened an alumni newsletter and saw his name, and remembered with devastating clarity that there was once a version of myself who didn't have to work so hard to disappear. The alumni newsletter arrives on a Tuesday in October, mixed in with the electric bill and a catalog Evelyn ordered. I almost toss it directly into the recycling bin. These things are usually filled with updates about people I barely remember and fundraising appeals I'll politely ignore. But something makes me pause, maybe the weight of the paper or the way the autumn light catches the college seal on the cover. I flip through it absently while my coffee grows cold. Class of '82 reunion photos. New faculty appointments. A dedication ceremony for the renovated science building. Standard fare until I reach page 7 and see a name that stops my heart mid-beat. Nathaniel Blake, the newsletter announces, will be returning to campus as a visiting lecturer in the history department. Distinguished career abroad. Expert in post-war European reconstruction. Guest lecture series beginning November 5th. The words swim on the page, and suddenly I'm 20 years old again, sitting in the stacks of the college library at 2 in the morning, surrounded by books on romantic poetry, while Nathaniel explains the economic factors that led to the fall of Napoleon. We'd started studying together by accident. Both of us were night owls who preferred the library's quiet hours, both of us drawn to the same corner table on the 3rd floor where you could see the quad through the tall windows. I remember the way he'd lean back in his chair when he was thinking, running his hand through hair that was always slightly too long. The way he'd argument with authors as if they were sitting right there with us, gesturing emphatically as he explained why Wordsworth's politics were more complex than most people realized or why Marx's analysis of capitalism was both brilliant and incomplete. I remember thinking that listening to him talk was like watching someone solve puzzles I didn't even know existed. The studying together led to late-night walks across campus. The walks led to drives to the coast on weekends, ostensibly to visit historical sites for his senior thesis, but really just to have uninterrupted hours to talk. And the talking led to something neither of us had words for, something that existed in the space between casual friendship and something far more dangerous. That summer between our sophomore and junior years, we both stayed on campus for research jobs. Most of our friends had gone home or taken internships in distant cities, leaving the campus feeling empty and infinite at the same time. We had the run of the place, the library, the dining hall, the quad where we'd spread blankets and pretend to read while stealing glances at each other across the space between us. I remember the night in his dorm room when he was reading Wilde aloud, and I was pretending to work on my own paper, but really just listening to the sound of his voice. The rain was coming down hard against the windows, and the room felt like the only safe place in the world. Something shifted that night. Maybe it was the way he looked at me when he finished reading, or the way the silence stretched between us until it became unbearable. But suddenly we were kissing, and I was discovering that everything I'd been taught about myself might be wrong. We never talked about it afterward. Not the kissing. Not the way I'd wake up some mornings with my heart racing from dreams I couldn't quite remember. Not the way we both started finding reasons to accidentally touch each other during our study sessions. We just kept pretending it was normal for two friends to spend every possible moment together, to know each other's schedules better than our own, to feel physically uncomfortable when we were apart for more than a few hours. The summer ended, and with it, whatever we'd been dancing around. Junior year brought new classes, new friends, new complications. I started dating a girl from my Victorian literature seminar. Nathaniel became absorbed in his thesis research. We still waved when we passed each other on campus, still sat at the same table in the library occasionally, but the ease between us was gone, replaced by a careful politeness that felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. By senior year, we were strangers who happened to know each other's middle names. Now, 20 years later, I'm holding this newsletter and remembering the weight of his hand in mine. The way he used to laugh at my terrible jokes about our professors. The night we fell asleep on his narrow dorm room bed reading to each other and woke up with our foreheads touching and our futures stretching ahead of us like uncharted territory we were too afraid to explore. I tell myself I won't go to the lecture. There's no point in reopening old wounds. No reason to disrupt the careful balance I've achieved. Evelyn doesn't even know Nathaniel's name, has never heard the stories I don't tell about the friends I used to have. Going to his lecture would be an act of pure self-indulgence, possibly even self-destruction. But November 5th arrives, and I find myself walking across campus toward the history building, my heart beating against my ribs like something trying to escape. I tell myself I'm just curious about his research, that it's perfectly normal for faculty to attend guest lectures, that no one will think anything of my presence in the back row of the auditorium. The room is packed. Nathaniel's reputation has clearly preceded him, and there's an energy in the air that comes with intellectual anticipation. I slip into a seat in the back just as the department chair begins his introduction, and then there he is, walking to the podium with the same easy confidence he had at 21, just refined by 2 decades of experience. He's older, of course. The boy I knew has been replaced by a man whose face bears the marks of years spent in sunlight and serious conversation. His hair is shorter now, silver threading through the brown, and there are lines around his eyes that speak of laughter and squinting at historical documents and long nights in libraries across the world. But his voice is exactly the same, warm and precise, with that slight tendency toward breathlessness when he gets excited about an idea. He's 15 minutes into his lecture on post-war urban reconstruction when his eyes sweep across the audience and land on me. He falters for just a fraction of a second, loses the thread of his sentence about Marshall Plan funding, but recovers so quickly that probably no one else notices. But I feel it in my bones, that moment of recognition, like a tuning fork struck in a silent room. Afterward, as people file out asking questions and making polite academic conversation, I wait. I tell myself I should leave, should slip out the back and pretend this never happened. Instead, I find myself standing in the hallway as the crowd thins, and then there he is, walking toward me with an expression I can't quite read. We talk for maybe 10 minutes. Polite conversation between 2 people who used to know each other well, and now have to pretend they're strangers. He asks about my teaching, I compliment his research. He mentions that he's been living abroad. I tell him about the college's new curriculum changes. Neither of us mentions the past. Neither of us acknowledges that we're both working very hard to keep our voices steady and our hands from shaking. When I get to the parking lot, there's a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. For words written in handwriting I would recognize anywhere. We should talk. I stand there in the October wind, holding this small piece of paper that feels like a lit match in my palm, and realize that the careful life I've constructed is about to catch fire. I carry that note home in my jacket pocket, where it burns like a coal against my ribs. For 3 days, I don't call him. I go through the motions of my regular life, teaching my classes, grading papers, sharing dinner conversation with Evelyn about faculty politics and whether we should replace the kitchen faucet, all while that small piece of paper sits folded in my desk drawer, waiting. On the 4th day, I call the number he left with the history department. We meet at the university cafe, a neutral space where running into each other could be explained as coincidence. He's already there when I arrive, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and a newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle. Something about this small gesture, ordering for me, remembering how I take my coffee, makes my chest tighten with recognition. The conversation starts safely. We talk about books, about professors we both remember, about how the campus has changed since we were students. He tells me about his years in Prague, then Berlin, then a research fellowship at Oxford that turned into a decade of following archival trails across Europe. His life has been itinerant, unmoored, the opposite of my carefully planted existence. I ask about his family, and he tells me he never married. The words hang between us like a question neither of us is ready to ask. Instead, I tell him about Miriam, show him the photo in my wallet of her graduation from law school, and feel strange talking about my daughter to the man who knew me before I became a father, before I became a husband, before I became this careful version of myself. What strikes me most is how easily we fall back into our old rhythm of conversation. He still argues with ideas like they're people sitting at the table with us. I still find myself leaning forward when he talks, drawn in by the way his mind works, the connections he makes between seemingly unrelated things. 20 years collapse into nothing, and I remember why I used to lose entire afternoons listening to him think out loud. But beneath the surface, there's something else moving between us. Something in the way he listens when I talk, like he's hearing not just my words but the spaces between them. Something in the way I catch myself watching his hands as he gestures, remembering how those fingers used to trace patterns on my skin in the darkness of his dorm room. We start meeting regularly, always in public places, always with ostensibly innocent reasons. Coffee to discuss a book he's mentioned, lunch to catch up on old friends, a walk around the campus to see how things have changed. We speak in half-truths and careful omissions, each of us testing the limits of what can be acknowledged without shattering the illusion that this is simply two old friends reconnecting. He tells me about the loneliness of living abroad, the way you can spend years surrounded by people who know you professionally but never really see you. I find myself talking about things I've never said to anyone. How sometimes I feel like I'm watching my own life from the outside. How I can go entire days without saying anything that feels true. The words come out before I can stop them, and the relief of being heard, really heard, is almost overwhelming. I start taking different routes across campus, routes that might accidentally intersect with his daily walks. I linger in the library longer than necessary, hoping to run into him in the stacks where we used to study. My lectures take on a new energy that I can't quite explain to myself. I find myself making connections I never noticed before, seeing patterns in the literature that feel suddenly urgent and alive. Evelyn notices. She doesn't say anything directly, but I catch her watching me sometimes with a puzzled expression, like she's trying to solve a problem she doesn't fully understand. When I mention that I've been having coffee with an old friend from college, she nods and asks polite questions, but I can see her filing the information away, cross-referencing it with my improved mood and the fact that I've started humming while I grade papers. The change is subtle but unmistakable. I feel more present in my own skin, more aware of the world around me. Colors seem more vivid, conversations more meaningful. It's like someone has turned up the contrast on my life, and I'm seeing details I'd stopped noticing years ago. 3 weeks after our first coffee, we're walking across campus when the sky opens up without warning. The October rain comes down in sheets, soaking through our jackets before we can react. We run for shelter under the overhang of the old library, the same building where we used to study until closing time, where I first started to understand that friendship could feel like falling. Standing there, both of us breathing hard from the sprint, water dripping from our hair, something shifts. Maybe it's the intimacy of shared discomfort, or the way the rain has washed away our careful politeness. But suddenly we're not two middle-aged professors making small talk about the weather. His shoulder brushes mine as he shakes water from his jacket, and the contact sends electricity through my entire body. I turn to look at him, and he's already looking at me. And for a moment we're 21 again, standing on the precipice of something we don't have names for. Neither of us moves away. The rain continues its steady drumming on the roof above us, and I can hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud enough that I'm sure he must hear it too. His eyes search my face like he's reading a text he's been trying to understand for years, and I feel something crack open inside my chest. Not breaking, but opening, like a door that's been locked for so long I'd forgotten it was there. We don't kiss. We don't even speak. But something passes between us in that moment. Some acknowledgement of what we were, and what we still are, and what we've been pretending not to feel. When the rain finally stops, and we step back out into the afternoon light, We both know that we've crossed a line we can't uncross. That night, I lie awake next to Evelyn and listen to her steady breathing, and know with devastating clarity that my carefully constructed life is about to become impossible to sustain. The man I've been for 20 years feels like clothes that no longer fit, and I don't know how to explain to anyone, including myself, who I might be without them. But for the first time in decades, I'm not afraid of finding out. The surgery isn't supposed to be a big deal. That's what Dr. Henderson tells me during the consultation, his voice carrying the practiced reassurance of someone who's delivered this news hundreds of times. A minor procedure, he calls it. Outpatient, under general anesthesia, home the same day. Just a small hernia that needs repair before it becomes a larger problem. Evelyn takes the morning off from her volunteer work at the library to drive me to the hospital. She sits in the pre-op waiting area with a novel and her reading glasses, occasionally glancing up to check the clock on the wall. We've been through medical procedures before. Nothing serious, just the routine maintenance that comes with middle age, and she has the rhythm down to a science. Arrive early, settle in with something to read. Wait for the surgeon to emerge with the standard update that everything went fine. I haven't told Nathaniel about the surgery. There's no reason he should know. No logical connection between a routine medical procedure and a rekindled friendship that we're both still pretending is exactly that. But as they wheel me toward the operating room, I find myself wishing I had mentioned it, if only to have someone else in the world who knew where I was and what was happening to me. The anesthesia pulls me under like a warm tide, and I drift away thinking about rain and library overhangs and the way some doors, once opened, can never quite close again. When I wake up, the first thing I notice is the light, that particular hospital white that reveals everything you'd rather keep hidden. The second thing I notice is that I'm not alone. Nathaniel sits in the visitor's chair where Evelyn should be, but there's something wrong with the picture. His face is pale, and his eyes are red-rimmed like he's been crying or hasn't slept, or both. His hands grip the edge of the bed rail so tightly his knuckles have gone white, and his shoulders shake with the effort of holding something inside. This isn't the composed professor who lectured about European Reconstruction. This isn't the careful friend who meets me for coffee and talks about books. This is someone who looks like he's been gutted, like he's received news that fundamentally altered his understanding of the world. The confusion hits me first, followed immediately by a recognition so deep it bypasses rational thought entirely. He's here. He's here, and he looks like someone who was afraid he might never see me again. And suddenly I understand that this isn't about the surgery at all. This is about 20 years of silence, 20 years of pretending that what we had was forgettable, 20 years of carrying each other's absence like stones in our chests. My voice comes out rough from the breathing tube they must have used during surgery. Why are you here? But even as I ask it, I know the question is wrong. The real question is why it took me so long to understand that he's always been here, even when he wasn't. Especially when he wasn't. He doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he looks at me with eyes that hold decades of unspoken conversations, and I see myself reflected there. Not the careful professor or the dutiful husband, but the 21-year-old boy who used to fall asleep reading Keats aloud in his dorm room, who used to drive to the coast just to have uninterrupted hours to talk, who used to believe that love was simple enough to survive in silence. When he finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of every year we've spent apart. I didn't know if I'd ever see you again. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they're dramatic, but because they're so quietly devastating. He doesn't mean the surgery, doesn't mean the minor medical procedure that brought me to this hospital bed. He means everything else. The careful distance we've maintained, the way we've danced around each other for weeks now, the possibility that one of us might decide this reconnection is too dangerous and disappear again into our separate lives. I look at him, really look at him, and see the boy I used to love reflected in this man's face, and feel something break open in my chest that I've kept carefully sealed for 20 years. The weight of all our unspoken words, all our careful omissions, all our pretending that what happened between us was small enough to forget. You didn't have to wait until I was unconscious, I tell him. And something about the combination of humor and grief in those words makes us both freeze for a moment. It's a terrible joke and also perfectly true, and neither of us knows whether to laugh or cry or both. For a long moment, neither of us can speak. The machines continue their electronic conversation around us, marking heartbeats and blood pressure and all the measurable signs that I'm alive and recovering, while between us hangs the unmeasurable weight of everything we've never said. His hand covers mine on the hospital blanket, and I don't pull away. His fingers are warm and familiar and strange all at once. And I think about all the times over the years when I've looked at my own hands and remembered, just for a moment, what it felt like to be touched by someone who saw me completely. Evelyn will be back soon. She's probably just getting coffee or making phone calls to update Miriam and our friends about how the surgery went. The normal world is continuing its normal operations just outside this room, and soon we'll have to return to it, to the careful choreography of our public selves. But right now, in this suspended moment between anesthesia and consciousness, between the life I've been living and the life I'm starting to remember I wanted, Nathaniel is here. His presence fills the space that I didn't even realize had been empty, and for the first time in 20 years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, even if I have no idea what comes next. The physical recovery from surgery is straightforward. A few days of discomfort, some limitations on lifting and exercise, the gradual return to normal activities that Dr. Henderson predicted. By the end of the week, I'm back to teaching my classes and grading papers, moving carefully but steadily through the familiar routines of my life. The emotional recovery is another matter entirely. Nathaniel doesn't visit the house. We don't speak on the phone, but something fundamental has shifted between us, some acknowledgement that can't be taken back now that it's been made. I catch myself thinking about him at odd moments, while shaving in the morning, while listening to student presentations, while lying awake at 3 in the morning next to Evelyn's sleeping form. Not romantic fantasies, exactly, but something deeper and more unsettling. The simple recognition that he exists in the world, that he's thinking about me the way I'm thinking about him, that we're both trying to figure out how to live with what passed between us in that hospital room. Evelyn notices everything. She always has, but now I'm aware of her watching me with the careful attention she usually reserves for her mystery novels, looking for clues to solve a puzzle she doesn't fully understand. She brings me tea without being asked. She mentions that the Hendersons invited us to dinner next weekend, and would I like her to accept? She asks gentle questions about my recovery, about my energy level, about whether I'm feeling like myself again. The terrible thing is that I am feeling like myself again, maybe for the first time in 20 years. But the self I'm feeling like isn't the self she married. The conversation happens 3 weeks after the surgery, on a Sunday evening in November. We're sitting in the living room, she with her knitting and I with a stack of essays on Thoreau that I'm pretending to grade. The fire is crackling in the fireplace, and outside the windows, the first snow of the season is falling in fat, lazy flakes. It's a picture of domestic contentment that we've enacted hundreds of times before. She sets down her knitting and looks at me directly. Are you in love with him? The question hangs in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or wave away. I could ask who she means, could pretend I don't understand, could deflect with humor or confusion. Instead, I set down the essay I'm reading and meet her eyes. Yes, it's the first time I've said it out loud, maybe even the first time I've allowed myself to think it so clearly. The word sits between us, small and enormous at the same time, changing everything and nothing. She nods slowly, like I've confirmed something she already knew. Her hands remain folded in her lap, steady and calm, though I can see the slight tremor in her fingers that betrays the effort this composure costs her. How long? She asks, and I know she doesn't mean how long since Nathaniel came back to town. She means how long have I been carrying this? How long have I been living this divided life? How long has our marriage been built on the foundation of my careful omissions? Since college, I tell her. Since before I met you. Another nod. She's processing this information the way she processes everything, methodically, looking for the patterns that will help her understand. When she speaks again, her voice is steady but small. Did you ever love me? This is the question that could destroy us both, and I'm grateful that she has the courage to ask it. Because the answer is complicated in ways that neither simple yes nor simple no could contain. I did love you, I tell her. I do love you, but not in the way you deserved. Not in the way you needed. She's quiet for a long time after that, staring into the fire while the snow continues to fall outside. When she finally speaks, her voice carries a sadness that cuts through me like glass. I always knew there was something you were holding back. I told myself it was just the way you were, that some people are more private than others. I made excuses for the distance, told myself it was enough that you were kind and reliable and present. But it wasn't enough, was it? Not for either of us. The truth of this settles over both of us like dust. Our marriage hasn't been unhappy, exactly, but it hasn't been complete either. We've both been living partial lives. She waiting for an emotional intimacy I couldn't give, me pretending that contentment was the same thing as fulfillment. We talk for another hour, working through the practical questions that follow this kind of revelation. We agree not to tell anyone until after Miriam's wedding in the spring. She deserves to have her day without the complication of her parents' separation overshadowing it. We discuss the house, the finances, the careful choreography of dismantling a life we've built together over more than 2 decades. Throughout it all, Evelyn maintains a dignity that makes me love her more even as I'm preparing to leave her. She doesn't rage or blame or demand explanations for decisions I made long before I knew her. She just accepts what I'm telling her with the grace of someone who has always been stronger than she needed to be. 2 days later, I meet Nathaniel at the park on the edge of campus. It's cold enough that our breath makes small clouds in the air, and the bare trees cast long shadows across the frozen ground. We walk slowly along the path that circles the pond, both of us careful not to slip on the patches of ice. I'm leaving, I tell him without preamble. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. After Miriam's wedding. I've told Evelyn. We're going to separate. He stops walking and turns to look at me, and I can see him trying to read my expression, trying to understand what this means for us. His face is serious, thoughtful, but not surprised. Maybe he's been expecting this conversation since that moment in the hospital room when everything we'd been pretending became impossible to sustain. Are you sure? He asks, and I appreciate that he doesn't assume this decision is about him, doesn't take it as a promise or a commitment. He understands that this is something I have to do for myself, regardless of what it might mean for our future. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I tell him, and realize as I say it that it's true. He doesn't ask about timelines or logistics. He doesn't press for assurances about what will happen between us once I'm free to make that choice. Instead, he takes my gloved hand in his and says, simply, I'll be here. It's both a promise and a dare, and we both know it. He's promising to wait, but he's also challenging me to follow through, to choose the uncertain possibility of love over the safe predictability of the life I'm leaving behind. As we walk back toward our cars, I feel something lifting from my chest that I've carried for so long I'd forgotten it was there. Not relief, exactly, but something lighter and more dangerous. The weight of secrets finally spoken. The terror and exhilaration of stepping into an unknown future. For the first time in 20 years, I don't know what happens next. And for the first time in 20 years, that feels like freedom instead of fear. Miriam's wedding is beautiful in the way spring weddings always are, full of promise and new beginnings, cherry blossoms and careful hope. She looks radiant in her grandmother's lace dress, and her new husband gazes at her like she's solved every puzzle he's ever tried to understand. Evelyn and I stand together in the receiving line, playing our parts with practiced grace, smiling for photographs, and accepting congratulations on raising such a remarkable daughter. No one would guess that we're saying goodbye to more than just our role as parents of the bride. The weeks that follow are filled with the quiet logistics of separation. Lawyers and paperwork, and the careful division of 22 years' worth of accumulated life. Evelyn keeps the house. She's always loved it more than I have, and she has the deeper roots here. I find a small apartment near campus, furnished simply, with large windows that let in more light than our old house ever did. We're civilized about everything. We meet for coffee once a week to discuss practical matters, taxes, insurance, the handful of social obligations we'll need to navigate together before the divorce is final. She's already started referring to me as her ex-husband to new acquaintances, practicing the words like a language she's learning to speak. Nathaniel and I move carefully through these months. He doesn't pressure me, doesn't assume that my leaving Evelyn automatically means a future for us. We meet for dinner sometimes, take long walks, fall back into our old pattern of talking about books and ideas and the way the world looks when you pay attention to it. But there's something different now, a patience, a willingness to let whatever this is between us unfold at its own pace. I'm learning to live alone again, something I haven't done since college. The apartment is quiet in ways our house never was, without Evelyn's gentle presence filling the corners. Some evenings I sit with a book and realize I can hear my own breathing, can sense the specific quality of solitude that's different from loneliness. It's not unpleasant, this rediscovering of myself in empty rooms. Spring turns to early summer. The final divorce papers are signed on a Tuesday morning in July, both of us dressed in our best clothes, as if we're attending a funeral for something that deserves to be mourned with dignity. Afterward, we stand on the courthouse steps and embrace carefully, like former lovers who've learned to be friends, which I suppose is exactly what we are. Now it's August, and I'm standing in the kitchen of our old house at dawn, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. The suitcase by the door contains everything I need for the next chapter of my life: clothes, books, a few photographs, the essential pieces of who I've decided to be. On the kitchen counter, in the porcelain dish Evelyn bought during our trip to Ireland, sit 2 wedding rings. Hers and mine, side by side, gold bands that once symbolized promises we made in good faith, but couldn't quite keep. They catch the early morning light coming through the window, and for a moment they look like small suns, beautiful and distant, and belonging to a different orbit than the one I'm choosing now. Outside, I can hear the soft idle of a car engine. Nathaniel is waiting, patient as always, giving me the time I need to say goodbye to this version of my life. We're driving to Vermont today, to a small college where I'll start teaching in the fall, where no one knows my history or my careful compromises. It's not running away, exactly. It's more like finally running towards something. I take one last look around the kitchen where I've made coffee every morning for 18 years, where Evelyn and I shared thousands of quiet breakfasts and planned our daughter's future and pretended that contentment was the same thing as happiness. The house will be fine without me. It was never really mine anyway, just borrowed for the time I needed it. The photographs on the refrigerator tell the story of the life I'm leaving. Miriam's school pictures, holiday cards from friends, reminders of faculty meetings and anniversary dinners, and all the careful maintenance that goes into sustaining a life you've chosen for the right reasons at the wrong time. I don't take them down. They belong to this version of the story, and that version deserves to remain intact, even if I'm no longer living inside it. I pick up my suitcase and walk toward the door, leaving the key on the hall table beside a note for Evelyn explaining where to find the spare set of house keys and which bills are due next week. Practical details, the final courtesies of a relationship that began with love and ended with respect. The morning air is cool against my face as I step outside, and Nathaniel looks up from where he's been waiting in the driver's seat. He doesn't smile exactly, but something in his expression lightens when he sees me, like a question being answered without words. I put my suitcase in the trunk and settle into the passenger seat, and he turns to look at me with the same intensity he had when we were 21 and everything felt possible. "Are you ready?" he asks, and I realize he's not just talking about the drive to Vermont. "As ready as I'll ever be," I tell him, and mean it. He puts the car in drive, and we pull away from the curb, leaving behind the blue clapboard house and the careful life and the person I was for all those years when I didn't know how to be anyone else. In the rearview mirror, I watch it all recede until it's just another house on another street, belonging to someone else's story. There's no swelling music, no dramatic declarations. Just the quiet sound of the engine and the morning light filtering through the windshield and the knowledge that after decades of living carefully, I'm finally moving toward the truth, one measured mile at a time.